From the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the 2008 Holiday Lectures on Science. This year's lectures, Making Your Mind, Molecules, Motion, and Memory.
Eric Kandel to deliver our first lecture. Eric has been a longtime member of the HHMI community. He's a tenacious and insightful scientist and a tremendously engaging lecturer. He's been recognized and rewarded in numerous ways, including the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2000.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your gracious introduction, Tom. Tom Jessel and I are delighted to have the opportunity provided by these holiday lectures to interact with you over the next 2 days. In our 4 talks today and tomorrow, Tom and I plan to give you a sampling of what the modern science of the mind is about and why it has become such a central and exciting area within biology. We begin by asking, what is mind? The major theme of the first lecture, and without doubt the most important discovery in brain science, is that the various functions of mind, thinking, feeling, acting, learning, remembering, creating works of art, are a set of processes carried out by the brain. Mind is to brain as walking is to legs, except infinitely more complex. The brain makes us who we are. It produces our every emotional and intellectual act. The brain determines our moods. It endows us with the capability for great joy and terrible misery. In his 2 lectures, Tom Jessel will discuss with you how the brain develops the capability for mental function, and once developed, how the brain controls our behavior. I will begin our discussion of mind this morning by considering learning and memory, 2 of the most magical properties of mind, because they're central to our existence. They make us who we are. They shape our knowledge. Learning, as you know, is the process whereby we acquire new information about the world, and memory is the process whereby we hold on to that information over time. Most of the information we have about the world and most of our skills are not born into our brains, but are acquired through learning. We learn the faces and names of our parents, our sibling, our friends. We learn the logic of algebra, the capability to dance, to engage in sports, to read music, to play the piano, to remember the words of the Star-Spangled Banner. As a result of this knowledge acquired by the brain during our lifetime, we are in large part who we are because of what we learn and what we remember. Moreover, tragically, specific disorders of learning and disorders of memory haunt the developing infant as much as the mature adult. Autism, attention deficit disorder, Down syndrome affect the quality of life of young people that suffer from them. At the other end of the spectrum, the normal weakening of memory age and the devastation of Alzheimer's disease haunt the elderly. Indeed, we'll learn this afternoon with our discussions with Jerry Fishback and Kate Jameson that even illnesses that begin in midlife or even earlier, like schizophrenia and depression, have an impact on memory. It's hard to think of a mental disorder that doesn't have one or another effect on memory. We've learned a great deal about normal memory from studying these disorders of memory. We've learned that memory is the glue that binds our mental life together, that without memory, life is made of a series of disconnected fragments that do not have any meaning in relationship to each other. In fact, life becomes meaningless without the binding force of memory. Imagine life without any memory. Imagine not being able to think where you were last week, last year, not being able to remember the first day you started high school. I'm going to show you an example of life without memory. Clive Waring, a brilliant musician, more than 20 years ago, suffered a serious brain infection, herpes encephalitis, that wiped out his memory. Here is a person whose life is a series of fragments.
How many years have I been ill?
About 20.
About 20. Can you imagine it's right to have one night 20 years long with no dream? That's what it's been like. Just like death. No difference between day and night, no thoughts at all. In that sense, it's been totally painless. Which is not something which is very desirable, really, is it? Which is precisely like death. If you have no senses of pain, you have no sense of any kind working either. I don't remember sitting down on this chair, for example, or the settee as it is. That was unknown to me. I've never seen a human being since I've been... That's the first photograph I've seen of anybody.
And who is that photograph?
It's one of my sons. I can't remember his name.
Tragic. Clive Waring, this remarkable man, shows us how central memory is to our existence. Without it, life is empty, it is meaningless. How then do we go about studying this magical process of memory? It is convenient to divide the study of memory into two parts: the systems problem of memory and the molecular problem of memory. In the systems problem of memory, we ask where in the brain is memory stored. In the molecular problem of memory, we go from mind to molecule. We ask what is the molecular mechanism whereby this storage occurs. In tomorrow's lecture, we're going to go from mind to molecules and consider the molecular underpinnings of memory storage. Today, we're going to discuss the systems problem of memory. Historically, the systems problem of memory addressed an even larger issue, and that is, can any mental process be localized to the brain? The first person to address this question was a Viennese physician by the name of Franz Joseph Gall, an extremely interesting character who had a lot of insights into the brain. Two of them were so profound that we continue to carry them and entertain them very seriously today. They're fundamental to brain science. The first idea was that all mental functions are biological. They come from the brain. He did away with the idea of dualism that Descartes was advocating, the idea that there are aspects of mind which are outside the body, they're spiritual. He said every mental process, from the simplest reflex to the most extraordinary symphony that Beethoven was composing, these are all products of the mind. He made the second point that the brain is specialized, and particularly the outer part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, the covering of the brain, doesn't function as a single organ. It's a number of different organs, each of them mediating a different mental function. Now, in order to localize mental functions, he had some knowledge of the brain. He knew that the brain was a bilateral symmetrical structure. It had a left hemisphere, it had a right hemisphere. He knew that it was a convoluted structure. It had infoldings called sulci and outpouching called gyri. These infoldings provide a means whereby you can take a large surface area like the cerebral cortex and pack it into a smaller space so you can put it safely within the skull. He also knew that the brain had four lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. And he began to think how to localize mental functions. And when he first began, he realized that four functions are not enough to explain what needs to be explained, an inadequate number of subdivisions. He needed more than four subdivisions because when he read the literature in psychology and from his own clinical experience, he realized there were more than 40 different mental functions that he had to localize. So the question is, how was he to do this? One way to do this is through clinical pathological correlations, to take people like Clive Waring and see where is the lesion when one has a deficit in memory. But he decided he would do this a different way. He would do this by observing people very carefully. He didn't want to study the diseased brain. And he decided there would be 40 different functions, and he identified them in different regions in the following way. He put the intellectual functions like comparison, thinking, cautiousness at the front of the brain. He put the emotional functions like romantic love, parental love at the back of the brain. And he put sentiments like hope, happiness in the middle of the brain. Now, how did he decide to go about doing this? He thought himself a very careful observer. And it struck him that one clue to how the brain works is to look at the shape of people's skulls. Because he was struck with the fact that people